How about those Minnesota Golden Gophers under Jerry Kill? This was a one-win football program just a few years ago. Now they've racked up back-to-back bowl appearances. Would like to get that postseason victory, but they looked pretty good for three quarters against Mizzou, the SEC East champ. They finished 8-4 regular season, gave Wisconsin some fits, gave Ohio State some fits, finished at 8-5. Like this football program under Jerry Kill, and maybe they didn't anticipate this series out of conference being what it is when they scheduled it, but they play TCU, and you got to respect that. So they go to Dallas-Fort Worth last year. They get pummeled 30-7, completely outclassed. This time on a Thursday night to open the season, TCU comes to the Twin Cities. Mark Rogers TV carving up every schedule in the country. All Power 5, including Notre Dame and BYU. So to make things a little bit more manageable, we're going conference by conference. We're ranking them 1 through 14 or 12 or 10, whatever the case might be. And we're going bottom all the way up to the top. Then we're going to throw them all together, and we're going to rank them 1 through 66. And that's going to take quite some doing, but we'll get to that. All right, we're in the middle of the Big Ten, and we're at the fifth most difficult schedule with Minnesota. So we mentioned it here. They've got TCU. So it's arguably the most difficult non-conference game in America, not just the Big Ten. It's arguably the toughest in the Big Ten as well because Wisconsin has a date against Alabama, but it's right up there. So that's pretty considerable right there. Keep in mind that we're looking at what team that division plays in. So that's most important. The East is better than the West in the Big Ten. But then we're also taking into consideration the cross-division games, of course. That is huge. That's the most distinguishing factor in all of this because you've got 7 like teams on the other side of the conference, but you only play 2. So you may play the 2 toughest teams and somebody else plays the 2 worst teams. And then, of course, we dive into the non-conference, and most of these teams only play 1 real tough game. But some are playing 2. We like what Purdue's doing with a Virginia Tech and also Marshall. We like a few other teams are diving in twice into difficult games like Michigan taking on BYU and taking on Utah. We've got, we just talked about Nebraska in the previous video, taking on Miami and taking on BYU. So Minnesota's got the tough game against TCU to a lesser extent. Pretty formidable foe the next week at Colorado State. So if they don't take care of TCU at home, which they're going to be a substantial underdog, they've got to go to Colorado State. Fort Collins, difficult to play on the road, and that will be probably a toss-up game. All right, Kent State, Ohio U, 2 very winnable games, and they must come out of this 3-1. All right, let's get to the Big Ten West. Okay, they don't have to play themselves. One of the tougher games would be games in the Western Division, but they've got Wisconsin and Nebraska. Okay. In the East, Minnesota's got to face Ohio State. So that's one of the big deals right here in ranking this the 5th most difficult in the Big Ten. They've got Ohio State and they've got Michigan. How tough is Michigan going to be? I think Michigan and I believe also Penn State are 2 of the big wild cards, especially in the East. If these are the same teams they were last year, Michigan's marginal, Penn State's decent. 7-6, 5-7. But if they take that jump, as we somewhat expect, not to the top 10, but periphery, fringe top 25, then that's much more difficult for a lot of people around the Big Ten East in particular, and for Minnesota having to play Michigan at home. So if Michigan's 5-7 again, they might pummel them like they did last year, 30-14. But if Michigan's now a formidable 8-4, 9-3, that becomes a very difficult game. So here's the tough stretch for Minnesota. We just talked about it. Nebraska, Michigan, Ohio State, back-to-back-to-back weeks starting on October 17th. So it's the 5th toughest schedule in the Big Ten. A lot of respect for Minnesota here. They've got to take on Ohio State on the road, and they've got TCU at home, and, of course, Wisconsin and Nebraska. And the Gophers hope that the Big Ten Western Division's on the line when they host the Wisconsin Badgers on the final day of the season. 5th toughest in the Big Ten, it's Minnesota. Would love to hear what you have to say. Compare and contrast these schedules. Give them a look. See who I rated 6th versus 5th versus 4th. And give me some comments, and I will certainly write back to you, and we will discuss it right here on Mark Rogers TV.